Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Shakwani Hent. I am the fourth vice president of the party, the spokesperson for Youth Affairs and Development, and the president of the Young Democrats. I would like to welcome everyone. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to introduce this afternoon's speaker, Caroline Jordan. Caroline is a seasoned HR professional with over 25 years experience in manufacturing, distribution, and tourism sectors. She has held a senior leadership position in both private and public sector environments, in both medium and large scale businesses. She is the holder of a Master's of Science degree with distinction in labor and employment relations from the University of the West Indies, a Bachelor's of Science degree in Applied Sociology, also from the University of the West Indies, and a diploma in theology from Condorton College. She is a practicing HR consultant and has served as an external consultant with ILO's Workers Bureau and with the Global Public Service Union, Public Service International. She also co-authored a weekly column, Dear HR, in one of the daily newspapers. Carol Ann is also a part-time tutor at the Barbados Community College and the current chairperson of the Democratic League of Women. This afternoon, she will be addressing the topic, Mission Transformation, Hope versus Hype. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me in welcoming Carol Ann Jordan.
Members of the General and Executive Councils of the Democratic Labour Party, members of the DLP family, friends and well-wishers, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I wish to express my sincere appreciation for the invitation extended to me to address you, and thank you for taking the time to be here. I welcome this opportunity to share with you as my observations and my reflections on this country at present. As a citizen, I'm concerned about our society, our social behavior, and the influences and relationships that are shaping the way we interact with one another. For me, an unnerving characteristic of this time is the willingness to accept without question. For an increasing number of persons, the acquisition of knowledge no longer seems to have intrinsic value. It does not seem to have value in itself. But I am firmly of the view that knowledge is indeed power, and that only good can come from the type of engagement we are undertaking today. Together, we will engage and critically assess what is happening around us and to us. And I will leave it to you to draw your own conclusions, just as I drew mine. As you are all aware, the Democratic Labour Party recently held its annual conference. And amidst all that transpired that weekend, on the final day of the conference, the Honorable Leader of the Opposition and political leader of the party, Ralph Thorne, gave his maiden speech to the party. Throughout his presentation, he repeatedly asked the question, why politics? In this presentation, I will provide part of the answer to this very important question, why politics? And also examine the extent to which the mission of transformation on which this country is said to have embarked is founded on real hope or mere hype. So let's start our examination. For about 30 years now, all that happens in Barbados has been viewed primarily through an economic lens. When a budget or economic statement is given, the private sector, the suppliers in the economy, are asked to comment and to give their input. If they are happy, then it is interpreted to mean that all is well with the world. If they are unhappy, then it is believed that everything possible must be done to make them happy. But there are two sides in the economic equation: supply and demand. Rarely, though, I dare say if ever, is meaningful comment sought from the other side of the equation: labor, regular citizens, or in the economic jargon, the households, who are also impacted. Now, it's not my intention today to reignite that puerile economy versus society debate which surfaced leading up to the 2018 election. But the economic lens is not the only lens through which what happens in the society can be assessed. As a student of the University of the West Indies, under the tutelage of the likes of Mr. Farley Brathwaite and Professor Neville Duncan, amongst other distinguished educators, I was taught that any situation can be assessed through one of three lenses: either a social lens, a political lens, or an economic lens. So for those who may need a real example, COVID-19 made it quite clear to us that even when economic activity grinds to a halt, social activity still continues. And citizens still have to live, and citizens still have to survive. So it was made clear to all of us that the quality of our existence depends on much more than money and economic activity. That COVID period taught us that irrespective of what is happening economically, society must still function and must be kept stable. And that period also taught us that politics is central in our societal processes, and that political decisions play an integral role in our social lives. Now, as citizens, we are aware that the governor of the central bank continues to be quite proud of the performance of the local economy. It was reported that the economy in 2023 grew by 4.4%. But a growing, flourishing economy does not automatically translate into the development of a society. Experience has been teaching us this. At the same time that confidence is being expressed in the economy, the Human Development Index, published by the United Nations Development Program, has shown a continued slide in Barbados's ranking. In 2016, Barbados was ranked number 54. In 2020, Barbados was ranked at 58. And in 2023, we are ranked at number 62. And this has happened without any comment. Developing a society is a qualitative, multifaceted process. A qualitative, we are looking at not the number of things that are happening, but the quality of what is happening. What is really the impact of all these various things that are happening? So it is qualitative in nature and multifaceted. So we can't just look at one aspect of it, of what is happening, and decide that is good and ignore the impact of the other things. So developing a society is aimed at improving the overall quality of life for the members of the society. We must accept that not everyone will benefit in the way that they might prefer, but surely the greatest number of people who can benefit ought to benefit. And surely this has to be the focus of any political administration. So just as there is need for growth strategies in the economy, there are also policies and strategies needed for social development to ensure that as many citizens as possible reach their full potential. In fact, I believe that it is the continued development of the society that ought to be influencing all political decisions. And it is also the basis upon which citizens ought to assess any government's performance. So development in this sense transcends infrastructural and technological advancements. The overriding concern of the citizen must be to the extent to which the quality of their lives and the lives of their loved ones have changed for the better as a result of the policies their decision makers and policymakers have implemented. So having set that context, let us now look at the idea of transformation. Transformation connotes change. And since the election campaign of 2018, this current administration has been repeatedly telling or warning Barbadians that this country has to be transformed to make it fit for purpose, whatever that means, and relevant in a 21st century world, whatever that means. For this transformation to take place, Barbadians were told that, among other things, there would be a new national consciousness, a better society, a new economy, and a new system of governance, whatever these things mean. And I keep repeating whatever these things mean because as citizens, we have not really been engaged to understand what these things mean. We haven't been engaged on what they mean, and we haven't been engaged on what these new creatures will look like, and we have not been engaged on why they are necessary. So it is that those who know, but many don't know. And as our elders often reminded, if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. So citizens had hoped that if they got the transformational leadership that was being promised, the quality of their lives would continue on an upward trajectory. They hoped that it would be easier for them to conduct their business. They hoped that more opportunities would be created for them to excel, improve, and take control of their lives. They hoped they would feel safe and secure in their homes and communities. And they genuinely hoped, that those who said that they cared would show it by investing in their lives and in their future, particularly by way of the policies implemented. There was an inherent, unwavering hope, especially among the most vulnerable, that their interests would be served and would be protected. You can start your own assessment by asking whether after 6 years, the hopes of our citizens are being realized, or whether that was all hype. Barbados boasts an economy in which there's a role for the private sector and a role for the state. And under this system, the state can intervene in economic activities in order to achieve social objectives. And when the state fails to intervene, those who need what we call a hand up, what I call genuine assistance, are abandoned because there is no focus on ensuring their well-being. I want to share just one example of an experience. I'd have to describe myself as an onlooker in an interaction, just to be able to explain what I'm talking about, because all that I have embodied in these words up until now really is intended to reflect what we see and experience as we move around on a daily basis. Now, I went to the bank for a transaction. Remember, we are now in an era, or supposed to be working toward, this new transformed Barbados where there is ease, greater ease in doing business. I was in one booth and there was an elderly lady with a caregiver. I'm going to describe who accompanied her in that way. So their transaction would have just required, as from the perspective of that elderly lady, all she wanted to do was to get the person who was taking care of her, to get that person's name on a bank account so that she could then be assisted, as she's not able to do a lot of what she would normally have done given her age. The first question really was, in explaining, the lady said, "This is so-and-so, and she usually does my business for me." That's a Bajan thing, nothing strange about that. But then the question came, how is it that she is doing business? Are putting in place, or supposedly putting in place, but I really can't really go. But the end of the story was that ultimately the lady had to open a new account. She had to put the person on. She couldn't take money off of, she couldn't take the other person off. She had to leave that account there. She had to then try to transfer money from one account to another. And this is somebody who ought to be just relaxing and enjoying the days that they had left. That interaction, as I told you, exhausted me. And that was only one. I am certain all of you in here can relay your own instances. So what we are saying is, as you know, yes, there is progress, but there is a qualitative aspect to all that we do and a qualitative aspect to our lives. So within any society, there are vulnerable groups, there are vulnerable individuals, there are special interest groups with their own wants, their own needs, their own desires. And as such, while the numbers of those categories of citizens and groups may be increasing, the government's financial resources raised through the loans, taxes, or sale of national assets are not. Again, we tend to assume that government has money. The money that government has is the money that comes from us. So we also have to be concerned about how that money is, I don't use the word spent, and we will come to that, how that money is invested. The available financial resources, we understand, cannot satisfy all the demands of all the various groups. But in these circumstances, since no government can give to all the groups all that they want, the government has to choose who they support and where money will be invested. So today we are told that Barbados is in a better place economically and that we have greater fiscal space or wiggle room as a result of the billions of dollars borrowed over the last few years. But as I said in the beginning, let's look at it through the lens that I use, which is a social lens. Are we better off socially? Where is the money being invested? In whom is it being invested? Who can be expected to take care of vulnerable citizens and groups if the government they elected to represent them elects not to take care of them? In the business world, it is accepted that change must be managed. And it is said that it takes just as long to change a culture as it takes to create it. If this is true for organizations, and it is accepted, in my view, the very same must hold true for societal change. Let us not forget that Barbados is to be made new national consciousness, a better society, a new economy, and a new system of governance. Regrettably, though, the change is not being managed. There are attempts to introduce many culturally traumatic changes simultaneously in the absence of any big picture or any clear vision of where the country is headed. Again, I'm just going to make a few remarks about this socialization context. The culturally traumatic changes, a lot of the changes that are being introduced are changes that, yes, they happen in other places, and yes, we know about them. But we are now introducing them into our society. I just gave you the example of that older lady trying to do what, under normal circumstances, we as Barbadians would do, and we are still being encouraged to do. Somebody was looking out for her, and the stumbling blocks, I call them, that were in that short transaction, what should have been a short transaction, is really not culturally Barbadian. I explained she was in her 70s. We say that Barbados is has an aging population. It is true. I am part of that aging population. But we are running headlong to create a Barbados immediately for a segment of the population, if that is what we're doing, a thought just came, for a segment of the population that is not the majority of the population. We are creating a Barbados for the future, yes, but we are also marginalizing the group that is currently aging, our elders, and I'm putting myself in that category. As citizens, we do not know where we are being led, and all we know is that unmanaged change, and we all know that unmanaged change invariably results in chaos. We have persons who are socialized in a particular way. They are not necessarily opposing for opposing's sake. The world that I grew up in is quite different to the world that my mother grew up in. She adapted, but she was given the opportunity to adapt. She decided what she could handle, and slowly but surely would expose herself to more and more of it. But there are some technological introductions that she's not going to touch. But we are trying to push the entire society into a particular path without acknowledging how persons have been socialized. And who we are is who we are. At this stage, being able to change that in the manner that is being presented, in the way that we are seeing it, is in itself particularly problematic. So not surprising then, Barbados currently manifests some particularly troubling social problems affecting a growing number of persons in the society and within the society itself. These problems require urgent attention, as their continued neglect can portend troubling times ahead. Now, I'm going to list for you the social problems that I'm referring to, and I'm going to ask you to forgive me if what I say becomes offensive to the ears. And I say that because these are words that we have not heard in such a long time, because we have not analyzed what is happening around us through these lenses. So because we have been focusing primarily on what is happening economically, everything that happens, we have aligned to an economic problem or an economic solution. And ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to introduce you to some words that have been long forgotten and hardly heard. So now I begin, having given you that preparation. Increasing poverty, one of the social problems we have to deal with. Unemployment and underemployment. Jobs are being created, but where are those jobs really? And can families be sustained by those jobs that are being created? Job insecurity, changing work arrangements, temporary, part-time, and contract work. And there's now new language creeping in where we're talking about 0-hour contracts. Another concerning, it really is a concern that we have to pay attention to. While we may have thought that the minimum wage was really providing a protection, those of you with, history would know that the trade unions themselves usually did not promote minimum wages. And their view was that to promote a minimum wage meant that you were putting a ceiling where persons who could afford more did not now have to follow. But having put a minimum wage in place, now we are hearing the government say that, all right, we're going to review that and we are going to index it to inflation. Believe it or not, that in itself tells us a lot, because there is an anticipation that that is going to also be a regular feature. That's my belief. Continuing with those words, lack of meaningful job opportunities, another social problem. Increasing social stagnation, another problem. And by social stagnation, I mean that there are not that many opportunities for social mobility, for moving up, for getting your life, earning more, moving, and being able to improve the quality of life that you have. Social stagnation really says that because those opportunities are not available in the society, that where you are is likely where you will remain. The opportunities for growth, for movement, for your own advancement are limited. Widening inequality, social inequality. Those who were able to listen to the call-in programs today would have heard a visitor, or I don't know, a Barbadian who lived overseas, who returned home. And his concern was that it seems as though money is making the mere fly in Barbados. That was not his way of putting it, but that was mine. He didn't have access. He was concerned about the access to the beach, about the citizens' inability to bring about change in those areas that really affect their quality of life. That middle layer that our society boasted about, where we had, persons at the top, a very large middle, and then persons in the lower rungs of the society, that is widening. The middle layer is either making it above, or they're joining the persons in the layer below. So there's widening inequality. There's increasing homelessness. And we saw the expansion of the homeless shelter. Those of you who can cast your mind back can remember the newspaper featuring the homeless in Bridgetown. We have a declining value of education. Not that education isn't provided, but there seems to be less of an appreciation for education as, I'm going to use the word socialization. I think the focus is on the academic qualification, which is it is a thing. But at the same time, we are also talking about some of the other things that I'm going to speak about shortly: increasing crime and violence, the increasing social deviance, the increasing use of illegal substances. Education has a role in creating the type of citizen that we want to see and that we need in Barbados in order for the quality of life that we enjoy to be at its best. So let me continue, because these are still the social problems that I have identified. We have an aging population, but there are no policies being put in place, no talk about what does it mean for Barbados if the majority of its population is aging. And the only conversation that I remember hearing about it, and I use conversation, broadly, is that as a result of what is happening, we need to import some people in order to ensure that our economy continues ticking. We were going to bring, we've put, not we, for Barbados, some initiatives have been put in place, but the population that is aging will also require more and more care, health care. But our health care is declining. The quality of our health care is declining. We have insufficient care workers. We don't have enough equipment. We don't have enough supplies. And we have an aging population. And the final thing on my list is food insecurity. Again, recently there's been, is it as recent as today, where it is that we suddenly realize that we don't have quality livestock, that we don't have enough sheep around. The fishing industry is destroyed. We have no agriculture. We have none. We cannot feed ourselves. We are depending on imports. And COVID taught us a few things. When there was global problem, when it was a global problem, we didn't even know how we were going to get supplies. I want to add one more thing to that. We are so ill-prepared. We are not focusing on our own security. I remember going to the park and having sweet potato ice cream, lamb burgers, all sorts of initiatives were coming through Carmitas, putting us in a position where we would, one, develop a taste for what we were producing. Two, we would produce what we were eating. And in that way, we would also be saving what money we have to be able to use on other things that we needed for our society. It would have meant that agriculture in itself would have provided opportunities for self-employment, and so on and so on. You could see how it could have been a ripple effect. We do not have any of that. Now, one of the first things that happened was that entire program was shut down. And we did not, at the time, see it was a problem because we would have been importing. We would have been able to get it from wherever. And then global things, everything changed. And there are some days that I will joke that today is going to be a day we may have to eat grass and rice. And, but the reality is that even the rice we import, except for, I'm going to come back to that. So don't let me digress too far, social problems. But I want you to appreciate the point. The point is that if we look at everything through an economic lens, there are quite a number of social issues that we have that impact our own survival that we are not paying attention to. In March of this year, a prominent member of the local private sector commended the government for and I quote, notable pro-business shift in the budget, focusing on business facilitation and growth. But remember that economic gains do not necessarily translate into social advancement, and citizens are recognizing this more poignantly the hard way. They've come to realize that the hope they held for the new Barbados appears to have been nothing more than public relations, marketing gimmicks, and grand illusions that flattered to deceive. In other words, it was hype. Political decisions are causing many of our people to give up their legitimate dreams and aspirations, to give up on creating a just society in which all, the vulnerable at one end and the comfortable at another, and everybody in between, all are guaranteed a place. Too many of our citizens are being forced to watch the dismantling of several existing social protection and safety nets that were carefully put in place over the years and around which many built their lives. Pensions are to be reformed. We heard that from the beginning. We still don't know what that really means. Pay attention because we are getting bit by bit by bit. But we do not know what that big picture is yet. And even though we don't know, that big picture is known because it was a condition included in the negotiation of birth. So there is a plan for it. We just don't know what it will be in the end. But bit by bit, changes are taking place. Too many have given up their hopes for a secure future. So really all it means is that the race to the bottom is well on the way, particularly in light of the IMF program in which this country is nestled and the debt with which it is now saddled. I want to say just a little bit about the race to the bottom. It is not a phrase that I coined. If you research it, you'll find it. And the race to the bottom encompasses the phenomena associated with globalization. And it speaks specifically or primarily about deregulation, making your environment such that it is attractive to other people to come in and invest. If we focus an economic line, that's going to sound really good because you're getting people to come in and invest in the country and blah, blah, blah. But remember that the country, whichever country, is competing with other countries. So if we want to attract people to Barbados, we have to make sure that what is being offered to the company that is coming compares favorably with any other place that they could go and set up business. We have a lot of protections. We have safety and health legislation that talks about what should happen in a workplace, what makes it safe. If we have to compete with somebody who can go to another territory that does not have those protections, the business will go to that country. And if we are to compete, we have to relax the protections that we have in place for our people. So it means that a lot of what we have put in place, the Employment Rights Act, we heard that that was going to be revisited and revised because it's too much in favor of the employees, the workers. So that's what I mean when I say the race to the bottom. Because we are competing against others, we want to attract persons who are scanning what is happening in the global landscape and determining where they will go. And because we are so focused on external investment for our own survival, the options available may well be a reduction, relaxation. So those zero-based contracts, for example, zero-hour contracts, those mean that a company can have individuals available to them, a pool that they will call on when they need them, but not that those persons are working on any regular basis. So it's 0 hour because there's no promise of any time. But when I want you, I'll call you. And we already have all the paperwork in place. You come, you work for a week, and you're gone. 0 hour does not give you any guarantees. It just means that we have an arrangement, an agreement, an understanding that I can call you at some point, and that is in place. So I want to say yes, life as we know it is indeed changing, and it is doing so without the discussion, without the transparency, that we expected and that we all hoped for. Looking through the lenses that I looked through, the big picture is not as pretty as is frequently being represented to us. And without strategic intervention by way of social investment, without a deliberate decision being taken that we are going to focus on developing the society, focus on the quality of life that our citizens, the majority of our citizens have, then unless that happens, we're in for a very rough ride. So what would happen without that strategic intervention, if I am to predict, is that we would continue to move forward at a rapid pace back to a Barbados long, long, long past. We started out looking at mission transformation, whether there was hope or whether it was hype. And my conclusion, I'll leave you to draw yours, but my conclusion is that this mission appears to be an unguided missile. And for the majority of citizens, in practical terms, the promised transformation brings an overabundance of hype and little hope. I thank you for listening. Shakwani says, I'm open for questions.
So right now we're going to open the floors to any questions. Anybody wants to go first?
Wow.
I didn't hear you touch on housing as a social need that needs
A
adjusting.
social problem,
Yes,
I agree, yes.
Could you
Housing is one.
could you include that in your group?
You want me to talk about housing? Yeah, oh, yeah. Yes. Well, the meeting today is about land. The meeting today, from what I understand it, just listening to the calling program, is about land and land transactions and trying to make it easier for land transactions. But I appreciate the point that housing is a social problem because there are lots of persons who really want to be able to access housing and can't. For us, housing has always been an area of concern, and the expectation, that's what it falls into, what the expectation of people from their governments, really, to be able to support them and get them the quality of their lives, get them to move socially. I can't. The focus on land for Barbados and the discussions that are happening, I will tell you what my concern about that is. That when, as I told you, I only found out on the calling program, but the concern I had was that it said that the key stakeholders were meeting, and we as citizens didn't know about it. The land is Barbadian land. It's not the government's land. And if land is going to be transferred from any one individual to another, the person who owns that land, as far as I would expect, is also Barbadian. So how do we determine who the key stakeholders are in a process like that? And in a process like that, how is it that regular citizen, owners of the majority of the land that is Barbados, how could we not know? Through my social lens, that is where I would go with that.
I raise the issue because following the campaign of the 2018, the Barbados Labour Party promised that within a short period, they would do an inventory of all the unoccupied houses, all the open spaces covered with bush, and they would have made both of those assets available to people struggling for housing. And that one of the priority areas would be for vagrants. And why I speak to that is because as the director of urban at the time, one of instructions given to the board was that we were to commence a program of identifying these houses in urban corridor. I am unaware of any progress made to it. And I think as an urgent social need, that is an area that we need to keep our focus clearly directed at.
I'm going to suggest to you, though, that all these social problems are social problems. And while housing, yes, is a problem, let's look at where Barbados is, because same thing that came out in the presentation. Everything can be a priority. And where do we then, which ones are the ones that we focus on? Ultimately, I think the aim is to ensure that Barbados remains an environment in which persons believe. I laugh because I just said all the hope is gone. But Barbados has to be the type of place where people believe and hope that they can change, that there can be changes in their lives, right? And when that is gone, even if, let's look at it, even if all those houses were identified, all those vacant lots were identified, given the current environment, will you be able to afford to do anything with it when the lot comes at you or is given to you, unless the government puts a program in place to assist those persons who needs the assistance? Then we still haven't moved. So my suggestion, what I'm saying is that government has to decide where it is going to invest and in whom, because there are people at one end who are vulnerable and don't have any means. And then there are people at the other end who are able to do for themselves over and over and over again. And we have to be able to satisfy everybody in between. Yes, please.
Thank you, Madam Presenter, for a very enlightening and incisive presentation. I was very keen on the problems that you face, that Barbados is facing, that you articulated in terms of the social issues that we are facing. Earlier this week I don't normally listen to call-in programs, but I heard this lady in a very passionate voice speaking of the callousness, the problems that she experienced with a child who was not breathing at the hospital. And I find it very distressing to think that could happen in Barbados. It was very painful listening to it. Nothing seems to be working in Barbados. I recently went to renew my driver's license. I was told you have to walk with the receipt. You cannot have the picture updated. I'm waiting for a particular report that someone supposed to bring in was there now for 2 months. Cannot get it out. And there just seems to be abundance of issues facing Barbados, and there don't seem to be no end in sight. You spoke of land. I remember the Right Excellent Errol Barrow once said, Barbadians going to wake up one morning and find that Barbados don't belong to us. And I've seen that unveiling before my very eyes. People just coming from all over the world, buying up, taking up, and we are being marginalized. So his words have been very prophetic, and it is sad that it has come to this. Finally, I'd like to thank you for adding to my knowledge. I wasn't aware of 0-hour contract. I've never heard that term before. I find it very interesting. I was going to ask what it meant, but you articulated what it did mean, explain it. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So they have a couple questions online, and one of the persons actually asked if you could explain this your oral contract a little bit more because it really sounds like slavery to them.
All right. I'm going to try to work through
Yeah, give us
a
an
normal
example.
engagement. Okay. If I have a business and normally, so I have a business, normally I would need to get, I'm going to go for a restaurant because that's where I think it will. Normally I would need to get waitresses, hostesses and so on and so on. But I can't determine how my business will fluctuate. Sometimes I will need a lot of people, sometimes I won't. So in outfitting my business, what I'll do is I will look for the minimum number that I need. I may need, let's say 3. But based on how my reservations come in or how, what is projected, I may decide that for some days I need 8. Those 8 persons are not employed, what we used to call full-time, but they're not employed by me on any regular basis. What we have says, when I need you, I will call you. And we can sign up a contract that says, you're making your services available to me when I need them. I'm not offering you full-time employment, but when I need you, I will call you. And so when my business fluctuates to the extent that I need people, what we used to call, or may have called casual workers, is that type of arrangement. But now it is being put into that kind of contractual arrangement. And what I believe, this is me speaking, what I believe happens or will happen is that the entity itself will have less persons on staff. So it's less NIS, it is less responsibility, it's less cost to the business. And then when needed, the individual comes in. Does that make it any clearer?
Yes, the person actually responded. I'm going to bring it to you right now. The person actually responded and said, so no opportunities to buy or build a house, to start a small business, just a circle of poverty, but several loan options for cars, as you notice. Isn't this a sign?
Caroline, thank you ever so much for your, I was a bit late, but thank you for your precise areas of dealing with a lot of the social problems that we are having. I find that Barbadians tend to feel very comfortable with having problems secretly and still being able to feel comfortable that they can continue voting the way they do. But that is another issue. But actually this zero contract was the one that was concerning me. You see, I was going to ask you, which would be maybe an unfair question, since we have a trade union background, what really is happening with the trade unions. I know, but the question lies that I heard some way back that every time that there's an issue raised about workers in terms of their contract work and that kind of thing, there's this question raised by the leadership of the trade union that the government will take away the concessions that they're going to give to the employers. And therefore, they seem to think that this can hold the employers to doing something. I was speaking to an employer here the other day, and the employer said they spend so much money on their own advertising their business that they really don't care that much about the concessions that government want to withhold from them if they think that this is going to cause them to make different decisions. So the whole issue of zero contract, that is putting such a burden on the worker. And if we want to call it casual work or whatever, you are in a position where you don't know if you're going to work tomorrow. You can't take a job from someone else because you may be called by your, let's call it, employer a day when you're trying to struggle to get some work with someone else. So the uncomfortable situation about that I don't hear trade unions and persons who represent workers talking about this in a consistent and broad way. What is happening to the Barbadian citizen in terms of how they see work? But once the government has started this whole business of getting into contract work with the government workers, then that spreads to the normal employers, and they think it is okay for them to do it. But there's still no problem with the government workers, trade unions either, that they don't see how they can protect the government workers, and therefore the other trade unions don't see that they should protect the workers outside of in the more public, in the more private sector. So, but I'm saying that I think we have to have a big discussion about this, because it is not only zero contract, but it's the whole question of the contract work. When somebody in the trade union got up and talked about there was a problem there with the workers, one of the hotels lay off 200 workers the next a few days because it was a government minister. And that is part of the problem. If we are looking as a government, even in our own party, to be looking at how do we treat workers, what is happening now when you decide that the government person, the government minister, is the one speaking to the workers about what the trade union, how the trade union should be doing their work. This is too much of a close area, so forgive me, but maybe you can find some points there that I've been making to see how you would respond to it.
I think the one thing that we have to take into account is, that's why I started out by saying we can't view everything through an economic lens. Because what the trade unions even are doing well, at least they're weighing, at least you're working, at least you're employed. But as the race to the bottom hastens, more and more persons are losing benefits. They're losing, and we keep talking about becoming individuals. We have lost the connection from the collective. There are lots of reinforced messages that we get. So it is, once I gain through, you ain't caring. So people are focusing on themselves and how they are getting through. And I appreciate that things are rough and people have to do that. But the idea of the collective, of working together and making change as a result of collective action and collective strength is lost. That is at the feet of the trade unions, because that was what trade union activity was all about. So if it is that individuals in the workplace were allowed to believe that they were able to fight for themselves and bring about change for themselves, and they believe it because when they make a representation, they get what it is they were asking for, who needs the trade union? Yeah, so the trade union for me has allowed the idea of the collective to be lost. And if you look at what is now happening, the little Facebook promotions and so on, that is an effort to try to get people back. Because if persons aren't working collectively, all of what we are talking about here, or what we talked about here, is going to happen much quicker. I'm amazed that I was able to witness in Barbados almost on a regular basis, not almost, on a regular basis, marches, protests, up and down. And now, not one. Well, sorry, not Marcy. I'm not speaking of. I'm talking Marcy being the exception, and I appreciate the word that Marcy has. I'm going to respect. But the issues are the same issues. If we go by what the issues were said to be, the issues are the same issues. So what is different? There was the understanding and appreciation of the power of the collective. The collective still has that same power. What is different? And I can't go beyond saying the trade union has allowed the situation to be where it is, and has allowed the worker, the individual, to believe that they're on their own. Cannot blame the person who takes that mindset after. If you remember when they had the issue at KFC in Oystens, and those workers were locked in KFC. And the leader of the union went to KFC and told the workers, "Oh, you lock in? See if they will let you out the back. Come on. Your people locked in. If I'm being held against my will, am I not in a position to do what is necessary to get myself out? Break the glass and come out. See if they will let you come out through the back. Come on." Is that what previous trade union leaders would have done? Yes, please.
Yes. Thank you. Ms. Jordan, let me join Jasper and the others in congratulating you on a very insightful and illuminating lecture. I was very keen when you spoke about economic factors and examining society beyond economic factors. When you said that, I thought of happiness. As you know, there are some constitutions in the world, in the Western Hemisphere, that speak of the pursuit of happiness. And it's something I think about a lot. I have some wonderful conversations with Derek. Every time Derek and I meet, being from the same generation, we speak of our childhood, a little older, but we speak of everything we speak of. And we look at moments of unhappiness, but we also look at moments of happiness that 40, 50, 60 years later, we remember them. So it must have been some genuine happiness that we've carried through life. And I look at Kimar here and Shakwani, and I wonder if what is their experience Is their experience ours? The happiness that we had, is it attained in their lives, 30, 20 something? So that I wanted to hear you on this question of happiness, because we had very little access to material things, very, very little. But our generation, through our parents, we were allowed to find happiness. And your lecture is very interestingly titled, Hype Against Hope. Perhaps we had hope. Perhaps we were optimistic. Perhaps we reached the age of 18 and felt that things would get better and that they would not get worse. This generation now, perhaps we'll have to hear from them. But before we hear from them, as to their contemporary state of mind, I wanted to hear from you on the question of happiness in today's world. Is this generation happy? We'd have to ask them, but
Yes.
I want to hear you from the sociologist perspective on happiness, which is very, very important to the human condition. Thank you very much.
Okay. I'm going to start by using another word that we've not heard a lot about. Because the one thing that we had, if I can put it in this context, is that we had a philosophy on life, what life was about, how it should be lived. And in that, we understood what made for happiness. Money was not. Money was a means to an end. It was not an end in itself. And that has changed. The curse word, I keep putting the word that might come across as a foreign word, not a curse, a foreign word, is philosophy. Now, I'm actually teaching ethics and citizenship at the Barbados Community College. And I had a new class. So I'm talking to them about the purpose of life. You know, these are the kind of questions you ask yourself. What philosophy is about, why ethics important, what is morality, all of those types of things. And at the end of this is just the introductory session. At the end of the session, I asked, well, what are your thoughts? How do you feel about what we will be dealing with? And one student said to me, ma'am, I feel like I'm in another world. It didn't feel as though you were speaking English. I do not get it. I do not understand it. Now that for me is an issue. And I don't hold it against him, because as simple as we think, understanding and discussing elements of right and wrong for the individual, good and bad for the society, these seem quite simple for us. But we were taught these things from before we could speak. And it was not taught in one place. Now we are hearing that the school needs to teach this, the school needs to teach that. The school reinforced what was taught to us at home and in church. So the three pillars of the society: family, school, education, and religion, church. Those three planks or pillars were responsible for socialization, telling us who we were in the world, what we should pursue. And happiness was it. Don't mind that you don't have that. Little with content is great gain. Those types of things were reinforced continuously. No, it is not being shared with our younger generations in the way or with the frequency that I believe it is. So the whole concept of happiness So one student said to me, Lord, knew my need. That in itself also says our expectation would be a resounding yes, stop, yes, I will give back, yes, yes, I'm not holding it against them. Because let's look at family dynamic in itself, where and it is primarily the mother responsible for that family. That's one situation. But even if it's both the mother and the father responsible for the family, those parents don't even get to be able to turn off from work. They work long hours, demanding environments, because the environments are becoming increasingly demanding. And then the technology. So you never shut off. And if you shut off, there's more issues because something came and you didn't respond. And so parents are also living in a completely different environment to what parents lived in before as well. So again, here we go. We have a responsibility to ensure that the quality of their lives, at least they can find happiness, to be able to teach happiness and share happiness. If I'm working, a full day, I come home exhausted, then I have to deal with the children, and exhausting exercise as well. So I think we have to see it within the full context of everything. So policy, from a policy perspective, the expectation would be that you're creating an environment in which families can now enjoy a quality existence beyond just the economic. How do we create that? If we say happiness is what we want families to focus on, then what does that look like? One last thing. Who we become does not happen automatically. It requires actual conscious thought. And so we have to make sure that we are able to promote those aspects of self that we believe will give rise to happiness. So y'all looking at me now like my students. But virtues, there are certain characteristics that we have to be able to demonstrate so that they are also able to see and emulate. So we learn in many ways, but circumstances, I'm just saying it requires conscious choice and action, and it's not going to happen. We say that, man, he's 16, but he should know he's 12 and doing that. But we have to teach. Behavior can be taught. Moral development is taught. It does not happen because you have reached a chronological age.
Hi, good afternoon, Caroline. Thank you very much for the thought-provoking presentation. I think you began to answer my question. But happiness has become very expensive in 2024. So as opposed to happiness, I think we could try to measure misery. Economists around the world have been trying to develop what you call a misery index to move away from like the hard, solid statistics like GDP. So what is the health of Barbados if the GDP is $10 billion, but majority of the people are cash poor? Right? What has changed from yesteryear till today. You quite rightfully said it. The institutions, which were the family, church, and the school. Majority of the black population of Barbados gathered in the church at least on Sunday once a week. So you had that transfer of information, transfer of values, transfer of thoughts, whatever. And it was kept quite community. Nowadays, the church population has dwindled and aged, and you're not getting the replenishing of the young people. Right? And that happens also in the family, in the church. I know in some schools, you see that the classrooms are getting smaller because the population is getting smaller. No, those three institutions fed the seniors and kept them on track. But through globalization, right, when Barbados started to open up now to the entire world, you had the recolonization of its people, but now through the influence of American type values as opposed to the old English pleasantries. Hi, sir. Hi, ma'am. Good morning. How are you? Are you fine? Have a good day. You are now seeing those basic pleasantries disappearing from culture. Right? So the younger population, because they had a bit of both, we grew up in the countryside, so I still had the family, the church, the school, the everything. But as I grew older and I got that experience. So we're more plugged into the technology now. So don't read the Bible as much as often. If you have a life challenge, you choose a psychiatrist or a psychologist as opposed to God, if you follow the train of thought. So the information that we are being fed as younger people is different, not necessarily better, but it's different. And we no longer have the traditional sense of how the seniors had it. So that misguidance of the young who refuse to open their minds to the wisdom and the counsel, then you find yourself buried more deep in mental health issues, depression, and be, I'd say, more miserable as opposed to being happy. You may have the material stuff, like laptop, phone, computer, motorcycle, whatever. But the intrinsic happiness and building values of the nuclear family, okay, and I mean a man and woman family, right? That backbone for me needs to be strengthened, and it could only come from state intervention. And I say that because the state has the influence on the minds of the people to be able to push them in that particular direction. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for sharing that, Kimar. As you were speaking, the one thing that came to mind was, again, another term that we do not hear and a perspective that we no longer hold in Barbados. Because way back then, when I was studying, one threat that was always spoken about was cultural penetration. There was a deliberate effort to ensure that we were, as you would say, fortified, that we appreciated who the Barbadian person was and what Barbados had. And we were socialized to the degree that even though we experience other things may come. It is not everything that comes that is good, and it is not everything that comes that we need to follow. So there was that protection that was also given to us, right? And I'm appreciating what you're saying, that no longer exists. Because I can have, first of all, we seem to think that everything that was British is no longer, did not have value. So we've thrown everything out. And we are now saying that, or it appears that we are saying, that what is coming from the US is better, or because it's not coming from Britain, it is fine. And that is not necessarily so. We still have to be able, as a society, to determine who we want to be in the world, what we will accept, and what we won't. It does not mean that we have to accept everything that comes. And again, I think it goes back because everything was economic. As long as it was economic in focus, it was fine. And we allowed too many other things to slide, to fall by the wayside. So I'm appreciative of your perspective. And I think it has to factor into any policies or decisions, that particular perspective. I don't think we are saying that, you know, way back then is what we're trying to get back to. We can't, because as we just said, the total environment has changed as well. So we're not going to be able to recreate that. But there are some elements that remain fixed. No matter how the society changes, we modify in order to maintain that they are, to ensure that they are protected and maintained.
Yeah. Pardon me? A couple of years ago, I asked a question because you mentioned children coming out and don't knowing certain things. And I asked the question, what is really the purpose of a school in terms of education? All right. And if the schools are all about educating our children to be productive members of society, or if it is about certificates, because in my mind, that's all it's doing, right? I went to the promotion at Harrison College sometime back when they're looking to change the education system into this new thing. And from hearing certain things, I said, well, this sounds like EduTech too, right? When I first went there, you know, I didn't hear anything about it before, but just listening to some meetings, it was about EduTech too, right? And we got to decide whether we want our schools to be teaching, because I mean, parents are no longer those parents from before. So we got to look at what we want our children to understand or to know. As we are talking about manners, as we are talking about certain things in society, right? And that to me, that's what the school is about, all right? And it doesn't have to be right through. If we teach these children that these little things from primary school, then they get to secondary school, you don't have to teach them there again, right? And I think that would solve some of our problems, right? A couple years ago, I had a dad, where the principal was saying that, you know, you walking and you coming down steps, and then before the children used to stand up as teachers pass or whatever, they're still sitting down as teachers pass, and you know that should never be, right? I know that some of the teachers I had, and I'm all the way up there now, that sometimes when I go and I speak to some teachers that teach me, sometimes I still stand up with my hands behind my back, you know, even though they're, you know what I mean? Right? And I think that we need to, as a group or society, to look at what we really, really want, right? My mother didn't teach me a lot of things. When they were at primary school, you had to go to school, then you check your fingernails, make sure your hair comb, shoes clean. You know that so a lot of this just needs to be at school itself and not necessarily home. Of course, at home, if your mother and somebody in green, yeah, you still have to that person that you're gonna hold some lashes, right? Another thing is that understanding what we have and where we're going is another thing. I come up in the days when people only, you know, you receive a passport and people start talking like Yankees already. You only get the passport, you know. You don't even know if you're going anywhere, but you know your language change, right? We had to deal with a guy, and we put it this way: he lived here for 18 years, went here for 18 months, and come back asking what is that? What he know was a folk group. You You know, so you know that if we want changes, we gotta start from the little ones. Because I mean, there was a little addict saw something back with this baby born in, and the baby take the scissors from the doctor, cut the thing, right? Take picture, you know, take a picture with the doctor and thing, and then in two baby gone on the computer and thing, you know, sending off the pictures and things down there. So it's that we're changing, right? And but we got to look at what we really want. I'll start there for now.
All right. I just want to make this comment in response to that. Again, I agree that we have to determine what role education plays. These are all philosophical type discussions that once we agree and understand, then we know exactly what we're doing or where we're going and how it is that we can then create ultimately what we want to create at the end. It does not happen automatically. And I just think that, I mean, there's a lot of work to be done, a lot of thinking to be done, and I'm not sure where that thinking is done and is being done. But remember that I like to remind that there was a time when our education system was aimed at creating a citizen first. A well-rounded citizen can fit in any place, in any situation. That has changed, or it changed in 1991, I think it was, with the then Minister of Education, where the focus became preparing persons for the workforce. That has a completely different orientation. So that's where the qualifications became the prime focus. But we are at the stage now where we are seeing the impact of the social impact of removing the focus on creating a citizen. And we're going to get revisit that policy. It is a policy decision that was taken, political policy decision, and it shows us the impact of those political decisions whenever made on our lives. Yes, please.
Hi, good afternoon.
Go ahead.
First of all, I want to say, look what you did good in person. You know, seriously. And thank you for giving us a thought-provoking, interesting lecture. I like the idea. You talk about happiness. It's sad that Kimar, he left. Right.
Mhm.
Kimara and Shakwani, you know, I want to look at the social side of things. Like after Denzel Washington, who was there? After Samuel Jackson, after Prince, after Michael Jackson, who was there? You know, I would like to know from them. They can ask Kimara and Shakwani. You know, that made us happy, the type of music they produce. Like people, everybody want to go to see Maxi Priest
Mhm.
when he's coming, you know, and whole set of stars. Shabba Ranks, you want to see Shabba. These things that made us happy. Would you mind? So this generation, I don't see anything coming forward. Just yesterday, I asked my wife, after Denzel Washington, what movies we gonna see? I mean, when I look to see a movie and I see Denzel, I can't watch it. I hear the title, nothing, just go and watch it. But I would like to find out from Kimar and Shakwani, who are the people, who are the heroes
That influence.
in the social side of things. You know, they're the ones who made us happy. Okay.
Shakwani, you're going to share?
I don't know if I can share that much because I'm thinking in this generation, the heroes are ourselves. But I'm bringing it to the next person who wanted to ask a question. Somebody over there.
All right.
Wow.
I just want to make a comment then, if I can,
Yeah.
in response to that comment about the artists and so on.
Mm.
I appreciate the influence of music. And the same question you asked there, we are in a position that we can ask it here as well. I don't know how many of you saw it. Did you see it? There was a video put up. It was during other local artists. I'll name some. More, I think, that type of artist. And when I say to you that when I saw the video, my blood ran cold. It was banned socially, but it does not mean that it stopped being seen. It was on social media. And the message that came from that, I'm wondering, I mean, what we are seeing now in terms of violence was what was being promoted in that clip. We have absolutely no control over that content. That's one. Two, and this going back to the same cultural penetration, et cetera, that for me is the equivalent of a bad boy kind of image. Is that I can be in a house with 7 people, all of us living in the same house, all of us on social media, and it is possible that I never meet your circle. I may not even meet you. How do I influence? Because that system, you have determined your own community. You can even keep me out of your community. So these are some of the issues that we have to grapple with, because we're still trying in the end to create an environment, a society, where everybody is living harmoniously. We're not in control, but we have to try to get back control, or at least reasonable amounts of control. And the only way, one of the things that we teach in that particular ethics course, we teach the stages of moral development. What stages do you go through before we can actually say that you are in a place that you can reflect on values and virtues and make your own decision as to whether you're going to reflect a certain virtue, whether you're going to hold on to certain values. Like, as I said, is a process. The very first process, the very first stage in the process requires that there be what is referred to as a morality of restraint, meaning that within the scheme of things, as you are bringing this child up, the first thing you introduce is restraint. They can't do everything they want to do, when they want to do it, how they want to do it. That gives a sense of discipline. It provides an element of moderation. It holds that child back from, because we know they will test, they will stretch, they will do whatever they can. As far as they can go, they will go. So the first stage in moral development is to restrain, teach that child to be able to control him or herself. The second phase allows that child know you don't have to restrain. They will conform to what you have put in place during the second phase, because through the discipline that you have instilled, they're going to accept the values that you consider to be important. And that remains until they are demonstrating or able to demonstrate a level of responsibility, where they are then able to take responsibility, be able to assess, make decisions, assess whether this is right or wrong. They know right from wrong. They know what the parameters are. The third phase allows them now, having demonstrated that they're able to make those independent choices, act autonomously, they're now able to look back and say, well, my mother always told me that if I'm going this place, I need to do this or do that. They're now at a stage where they will say, well, I agree with that, and they maintain that particular value, or they're responsible enough now, they're responsible for themselves, they can say, I'm not going to do that anymore, and they determine then what their action will be. It is a process, stages of development, and if those are not there, and I believe, that's my belief is that is what is required. Put those restraints back in place until those young people are able to show that they are now responsible enough to make their own decisions. But that's not happening as yet.
I want to take this time to thank Carol Ann Jordan for her wonderful presentation. We can tell how good it was because we had so many questions both online and in person. But some of the things really resonated with me because thinking back to when I was younger and the rules set in place, yes, I was younger at some point, and the rules set in place, we don't really have those rules now for children who are 5 or 4 or even going into secondary school. It's more like you could go to church if you want to, not you have to go to church on Sunday, you have to go to Sunday school, you have to go to band practice. It is now we give them an option, and I feel like because we're giving them so much freedom, we're also giving them the freedom to get confused, get caught up in negative behavior. I feel like this generation, as you said, needs more structure, more foundation, because a person online spoke about this generation may have a lack of foundation and we may need to get back to the roots of that. So I think this was an excellent start to the conversation. Hope versus hype and how we would navigate that going forward. One, as a person, as a people, and as a party, and as the public, because we can't do this alone. And we can see from today's presentation, this is the beginning of how we can make a transformation in the right direction. And I want to ask everybody to give Carol Ann a round of applause because her presentation was excellent. And I hope to see everyone back next week for next week's presentation. Have a good day, everybody.